Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, a show on India's national broadcaster Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations and key developments in important countries and regions of the world that have a bearing on India's rise. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking a close look at two crucial neighboring countries of India that have undergone major transformations, Nepal and Bangladesh. Political changes in these countries have brought new dispensations to the helm. What does this mean for India and for the region and the world? And how can India continue to play an influential role in shaping the trajectories of these two countries? These are the themes of the show. And to discuss this, I'm very privileged to introduce you to a domain expert and a scholar, Dr. Constantino Xavier. Dr. Xavier is a well-regarded scholar on South Asia and its developments and writes extensively on these topics. It's great to have you here, Constantino.
Thank you. So happy to be here on your show, Sreeram.
So, we have seismic change in Nepal. Let's start with one of our important Himalayan smaller neighbor. And, this country has undergone a lot of political convulsions, turbulence, instability, 14 prime ministers in 17 years and that sort of thing. But finally, we now have this dynamic new personality in the form of Balen Shah, who's become prime minister at the ripe old age of 35, and his Rashtriya Swatantra Party also is barely a few years old and has swept away all the old established centrist and left-wing parties. So clearly the nature of the change in Nepal is huge following the student protests or the Gen Z movement that overthrew the old regime. And really the question for all of us in India and for the world is, how deep is this change as you see in Nepal, and what can we infer from their domestic change vis-a-vis their foreign policy? What will be Balen Shah's foreign policy? I mean, is this some kind of a black box, or can we unpack it and try and peer into it?
Big questions, I think, Sreeram, big questions for me and for India and for the neighborhood. You mentioned that he had swept away the old guard at the ballot boxes. I think over the last few days we saw that he's also not only swept them away electorally, he's literally imprisoned and detained now under the new government a few of the old guard people, accusing them of corruption, of taking the country into a very bad direction over the last few years. So he certainly has not only promised change, he's effectuating it now in many other ways, including through the judicial way. But it's a big change precisely for what you said. We had so many prime ministers and a continuous political instability in Nepal for now 15 years. And that's why it's the first time that you see elections in Nepal, in fact, since 2006, since the change towards a democracy and the 2008 constitution, it's the first time that you have such a strong majority by a single party. So that's number one. It promises stability.
So no more coalition muddled?
For the time being, no. This is now a single party, well-entrenched party that has a strong parliamentary mandate to do something, let's see what it does, but to hopefully also reform and provide stability. That's number one. Number two is what you mentioned about the youth. The new Prime Minister of Nepal is 35 years old. The last time in Nepal we had a Prime Minister at that age was Surya Bahadur Thapa in 1964. So it's been 60 years that you had someone as young. And therefore it's a return to a more youthful politics in Nepal, a new leadership. The oldest cabinet minister, I think, currently in this new cabinet is 51 years old, Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, the finance minister. So that tells you that we have a range of 20 years, basically, between the 30s and the early 50s of what are relatively young ministers and decision makers leading the country forward. And therefore, what does that mean going forward? I would expect two, three things. One is reforms, important reforms in the country towards opening up the economy, towards international engagement. Two, I think it will mean a more mature relationship with India, which is a bit ironic because you have young people. But I think young people here have a greater openness. In fact, 4 out of the 15 cabinet ministers now have all been educated in India.
Including Balen himself.
Including Balen himself. So there's a certain proximity there that can lead sometimes to also, of course, resentment, but I think leads to greater familiarity with India and this newer generation that has taken power in Kathmandu.
Right. And, looking at the foreign policy angle, I mean, when there was this revolving door situation, prime ministers coming in, going out, coalitions being formed, then breaking down and fresh elections, post-monarchy, Nepal has not been stable. And in those situations, normally whenever the Nepali Congress, the centrist, formation was in power, it would be seen as quote-unquote pro-India. And when you had, the leftists, the Marxist-Leninists and the Maoists, or the combination of the two in power, it would be considered to be, pro-China. I mean, that's how it was usually labeled. And this dynamic, China always used to figure, and some kind of a Cold War or a competition between India and China in Nepal for influence. So now with Balen Shah and with the RSP in power, I mean, this is an unknown commodity. What is going to happen to that India versus China dynamic there? And as you very well know, these smaller countries, there isn't being seen as turf on which the bigger players are coming and fighting out their ego battles, and they often say, look at us for what we are and not as a pawn in a bigger global game. So Balen Shah clearly represents this youth, as we mentioned. So what do you think is their approach likely going to be when it comes to the China versus India rivalry, and how is that going to play out now in this completely changed context? There is no Maoist, there is no communist, there is no Nepali Congress to speak of.
Yeah, so I think about the labeling you mentioned, Sreeram, that we often hear. I think for many years now we have seen every leader play different foreign policy cards. I think the idea that the Nepal Congress was somehow particularly friendly towards India is long gone for the last 15 years now. Look at three key figures. You look at Mr. Oli from the UML, the Communist Party. He has been very close to India in the past, also very close to China. Look at Mr. Deuba from the Congress Party, has been very close to India in some parts, sometimes also very hostile towards India on other issues. Look at someone like Mr. Prachanda from the Maoists, who had a very close relationship with India and has also played a lot of a role in engaging closer with China. So I expect the RSP also to be able to play that foreign policy game, which is reach out to China, keep a good relationship with China, which is one of two neighbors that Nepal has, and at the same time also repair the relationship with India. I think the first statements we saw from Prime Minister Balen Shah indicate that he wants to restore and repair that relationship with India. And therefore I think there is going to be the typical balancing game, and we cannot label different leaders as being more or less aligned with only China or with India. I think in the Maldives you see this, in Bangladesh you see this, in Sri Lanka. All of these leaders are trying to have their own country first, and they're going to play not only India, China, they're going to have good relationships also with the United States, with Europe, important export markets or sources of finance, with Japan, an important play in South Asia, with Australia, for example, in the Bay of Bengal region. So that's one. Two, you're absolutely right. Many of these countries are very worried about becoming stomping grounds for the bigger countries. Nepal only has two neighbors. It's sandwiched. It's landlocked between two giants. There are two great concerns, I think, in Nepal. One is that there's going to be a great India-China friendship that makes Nepal, a flyby country, or in some ways reduces Nepal's capacity to play one off against the other. So a good relationship with India and China is not necessarily something that I think Mr. Balen Shah will hope for. But he also doesn't want probably a very hostile relationship between India and China, because Nepal has pitched itself as a transit country, as a country at the hub of a trans-Himalayan economic corridor. And if it wants to do that, it of course depends on a good relationship between India and China. I think over the last few weeks, we've seen now indications that India-China relations are warming up. I assume that the new Nepal government sees that in a positive way.
Yeah,
but of course, the big litmus test will be what will he do concretely for India and with India. And that's still a question mark. I expect New Delhi to be in a wait and watch mode and see not only what he says, but what he will do in terms of, for example, facilitating India's development cooperation projects. And above all, something that has been a big irritant, Sreeram, in the past, which is, can you also resist the temptation to play politics at home by hurting India in public, right?
India becoming like a political football
correct.
and being used to settle scores in the domestic arena or as a scapegoat. Yeah, that's been an issue in Nepal and elsewhere, and that's something we would not be so keen on. Tino, let's also now shift gears to look at Bangladesh. I mean, a much bigger neighbor, in many ways more problematic given the demographic situation in eastern India and our concerns about Islamic extremism and fundamentalism there, and the fate of minorities, Hindu minorities in particular. We have had a very, very rough ride with the previous interim administration of Muhammad Yunus. But now, after the election, the decks have been cleared for the return of one of the big mainstream parties, Bangladesh National Party under Tarique Rahman. So in that sense, is the old guard only. It's not a big revolution like in Nepal where the old order has been swept away, but here, the old order in a way has made a comeback after almost 20 years. So what do you make of the change in Bangladesh, the political change after the elections and the ascent of Tarique Rahman, and how much continuity and change do we expect between, say, the BNP of the past, in the pre-Sheikh Hasina era, and the BNP today? And what do you think will be Tarique Rahman's approach to governance? He's been talking about a Bangladesh first foreign policy also, which is meant to distinguish it from the previous regime of Sheikh Hasina. So your thoughts on the changes in Bangladesh?
So I think one important term that Prime Minister Narendra Modi used in his letter to that point, still the candidate to the elections and now Prime Minister Tarique Rahman, was a new chapter in India-Bangladesh relations. Late December he wrote that letter. He said on the condolences of his deceased mother, also former Prime Minister of Bangladesh, there was a reference to a new chapter. A new chapter doesn't mean a new book. It is the same book of India-Bangladesh relations, and I think that's been the Indian message. We have achieved a lot between the late 2000s and 2024. Trade, for example, boomed by 3 or 4 times in just 10 years, right?
Bangladesh became at one point a 5th largest trading partner of India.
Yes,
worldwide.
A very important economic partner. It might not have been the most important factor, but it played a very important factor in Bangladesh's own economic development and rise as an export hub and as a developing country towards middle income status. So this is the same book, but a new chapter with a new leadership in Dhaka. And I think there's an appeal there to then candidate, now Prime Minister, and saying, let us understand what you are unhappy about and let us work but continue this larger book of India-Bangladesh common development and growth. Number 2, you used, of course, this reference, you mentioned this reference of Bangladesh first. This is not so different from what the current Maldivian president mentioned when he came into power and said Maldives first. But when the Bangladeshi Prime Minister mentions this, Bangladesh first, I think he's sending also a message at home that is based on the very prevalent narrative, Sreeram, that the previous dispensation under Sheikh Hasina did not put Bangladeshi interests first, that she somehow sold out economic sovereignty, signed off to trade and transit deals that were asymmetric and not in Bangladesh's best interest. Now, we scholars can discuss whether that's true or not. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. It was very beneficial to Bangladesh, but of course, not the perfect deals for Bangladesh. But he's saying that now we want to revisit these deals, still continue with India. That's going to be a rocky road because that means discussing trade. It means renegotiating transit rights for Indian goods to transit across Bangladesh into the northeast region or to Bangladeshi ports. It means rediscussing water, of which we're seeing over the next few weeks an important discussion on the renewal or not of the Ganga Treaty of 1996. So there's a variety of things that I think will be very important to watch to see whether the new government in Dhaka is seriously committed to repairing the relationship with Bangladesh or with India, or whether it's just saying some nice things.
We were highly concerned during the Muhammad Yunus period that the Jamaat-e-Islami and the hardliners were gaining ground and that they have effectively used up the power and will now use it to create another Pakistan on our east, or bring back the pre-1971 type of nightmare scenario for us. But under Tarique Rahman, what do you expect in terms of this ideological issue, the question of Islam, because that is very core to how they approach India, right? I mean, if they say India as a a melting pot or a great confluence of different civilizations, well and good. But if they see it as a Hindu India only, and then they approach it as some kind of a foe or an enemy, then we have a problem, right? So how do you see the Tarique Rahman? Is this BNP different from the previous avatar when it was allied with the Jamaat?
Yes, I think the short answer is yes. It is a different BNP. And sometimes the best thing you can do for politicians who are out of the arena, out of the game for a long time. Prime Minister Tarique Rahman was in London for 17 years, so he was not only out of politics, he was out of the country. The BNP was out of power for more than 15 years. So the best thing you can do sometimes is to bring them back into power. So they realize, the difficulties of taking decisions, and there's a natural pragmatism that will come up. This does not always happen. We know of groups, different groups who have taken to power and have taken more extremist positions. I'm quite confident that BNP, even though there are some people from the past coming back to power, but I think that is realizing that it needs to have a moderate position towards India. And that basically, Sreeram, is based also not on just some ideological change. It's based on the imperative to offer development to Bangladeshi population. More than 50% of Bangladeshis are below 30 years or even less of age. This is a very young population that has tasted growth, economic development for the last 15 years for the first time in decades. So they expect more. So any government that comes to power, and I would say even if imagine the Jamaat comes to power at some point in future, these parties have to develop solutions. Now, if you're in Bangladesh and you have a very long boundary with India, 4,000 kilometers plus, right? It's your next door market. It's one of the largest economies in the world. You have to realize that many of your solutions for your political survival at home require better relations with India and therefore also a more moderate stance to India. But big caveat, of course, is there is today, Sreeram, we know this, a deep sentiment among the population in Bangladesh that is not very favorable towards India. When Prime Minister Modi last visited Bangladesh, there were some riots, there's concerns that has grown post-24 with the difficult relations you mentioned. So I expect also, and I see that happening now, a larger outreach from India to regain some of the trust on the streets in Bangladesh. That's going to be an uphill battle for Indian diplomacy. But India has been able to turn around things in the neighborhood in the past, and I think it will if both sides play along. But above all, Sreeram, this is the economic growth imperative for both countries. This is the largest country in the world and the 8th largest country in the world. These are huge markets that as the West closes down its markets, imposes tariff restrictions, which are hitting both countries with Bangladesh particularly hard. I think that naturally Bangladesh in particular, as a bit of a smaller country, will also have to rebalance itself a little bit and realize that there's a very big market next door. And India on its side will have to be, you use the word generosity, sure, the generosity doesn't only come in words, but also with costs, which means, for example, some of the industries within India that are a little bit concerned about opening up its market towards Bangladesh will have to open up, and those are some of the economic, if you want, sacrifices that India will have to take politically to show that it also can deliver solutions to Bangladesh's growth. That means also investments in technology, education, the health sector, and most importantly, I think India has persisted with this throughout the years, which says we will build connectivity, whether it's roads, railways, waterways, border management, infrastructure with Bangladesh. Whether you do it on your side or not is your decision, Bangladesh. India has persisted. In fact, let me refer to you in October 2024, when the relationship was very difficult, Sreeram. The Home Minister of India, Mr. Amit Shah, went and inaugurated the most modern checkpost that India has on any of its land boundaries in Benapole, Petrapole, between India and Bangladesh, to send that signal that connectivity must continue whatever happens politically.
Right. And in fact, we have, talking of this growth imperative and the, pragmatic need to cooperate, be it Nepal or Bangladesh, obviously India's economic growth is, can pull these two economies up alongside it, right? And that's the great promise of regional integration. And we already have the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, formulation to connect these four countries. But looking forward from the Indian point of view, so far we spoke about what will be the approach of Nepal and Bangladesh under the new regimes towards India. But let's look at what India can do more for them. We already spoke about the projects, the connectivity, economic growth. Apart from the physical connectivity and the infrastructure projects, what more do you think we can do to keep the trust of Nepalese and Bangladesh people, so that no matter who comes to power, no matter who wins the next election or the next cycle, India remains most trusted and valued in the hearts and minds of these people?
I'm glad you asked that softer question. We underrate that, Sreeram. You've done a lot of work on this, on the importance of cultural diplomacy, soft power, capacity building, reaching out to citizens. But let me just give you one example of the physical connectivity, so our audience understands how important it is. Over the last few days, Bangladesh is being hit hard, even harder than India, on the Iran crisis.
The fuel
shortages. Where has India's fuel that has been passing on to Bangladesh, that India now is offering to Bangladesh at Bangladesh request, going through to the India-Bangladesh pipeline, friendship pipeline, that Bangladeshis often were criticizing in the past as a form of dependency on India. So I think building physical connectivity is often criticized by neighboring countries, and naturally they're worried about depending on India. But here we are, where it's playing a very important role to support Bangladesh in a time of deep crisis. So I think that should be a lesson for neighboring countries too, that building interdependence with India is critical. It's going to be tough, it's going to be leading to wins and losses, but that's the language and that's the agenda that needs to be paramount. On the softer side, I think very important is, as we have very young populations, Sreeram, in this neighborhood, and I mentioned again, this is a region where 50% of the population sometimes is below 25 years of age. We have to be able to explain what India is doing, to showcase that, whether through media outreach, but also by bringing these people, and I think important researchers, decision makers, parliamentarians, think tank experts, young students, people who are in the elites and business and industrial elites in these countries to India. We have to show them what is happening in India. We have to show them the good things that are happening in India, the modern country that is emerging on this side. And also, by the way, we have to send more people from India to those countries to learn from them. What have they achieved? Bangladesh has a lot of successes in the health and education sector from which India could benefit. You mentioned that Bangladesh can benefit from India's growth. I think equally the states of West Bengal, Assam, Tripura and the parts of Northeast will also be lifted up economically by a stronger, more developed Bangladesh. There are many examples of that. If you want to export from Assam internationally, if you have access to Bangladeshi ports, you will be able to do that. So I think an outreach, a sensitivity towards also learning from your neighboring countries is very important. They're not just receivers. I think there's a lot we can do by people-to-people diplomacy, and I wish we had many more people from India going to these countries to study them, to spend time there, because otherwise, it's going to be a one-way street. And if you say that you want to learn from others, that generally sends a very good positive signal, besides the benefits of actually learning.
No, absolutely. We need to do all of these things that you've underlined, and probably be more creative also in the way we engage with young Bangladeshis, young Nepalese, to give them an imagination about how you can be progressive, moderate and successful in life. And that's something our startups have to.
Yes.
In fact, Balen Shah of Nepal has been talking about completely digitally transforming Nepal from an older generation of technologies to a newer one. I think India can do so much there as well. Last word, China and the United States, big powers, they always have some role or the other, even though maybe South Asia is not so central or the core area of their interest, but still they do have a role. And we often say that India and the US, we should cooperate. For example, Nepal, the Millennium Challenge Corporation has benefited India, Nepal through American funding. And there, Americans want to push back the Chinese influence in this region. Do you think there's something in that triangle there with Nepal and Bangladesh? We should have coordinated better with the US, but unfortunately it's not happened in the case of Bangladesh. Last word on what we can do with regard to these external players. It's easy to say this is India's backyard and all big powers go away, right? That's the old so-called Indira doctrine and all that. But Narendra Modi era, we have been more open to partnering, especially with the US, to push back Chinese influence. So your last thoughts on this triangle, US, China, India, in Nepal and Bangladesh?
Yeah. It's a very competitive field now. The region was more closed. India had more power, relatively speaking, in the past. Today there's competition, and actually that's a very good thing, Sreeram. It's a very good thing because when you have competition, you start rethinking what should we do better, how should we deliver more, public diplomacy, how should we communicate, how much more finance and trade do we need to do with these neighboring countries. So first of all, the presence of the US and China, but particularly of China, which has been predominant in the neighborhood, has pushed India to do more, faster and better on all accounts than it ever had done in the past, maybe in the 1950s a little bit more. Number two, I think you need to work with many, many actors. Sreeram, you mentioned the policy of diversification of India. This applies also to the neighborhood. Today you have good dialogues between India and Japan, and joint projects in these third countries, in Sri Lanka, dialogues, discussions, mobilization of finance, investments in infrastructure. India, European Union. The European Union is a very important play in South Asia. The European Investment Bank is interested in supporting India's connectivity projects. India, Australia and the Bay of Bengal region on maritime security issues, on issues like the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. So today I see, besides China, where of course the comfort level is less for India, but many other countries that are working with India, and India is exactly like you mentioned, saying, welcome to our neighborhood, let us join forces to deliver better to our neighbors and to develop triangular partnerships, to develop solutions that allow this very young, very politicized population in South Asia to benefit from growth and stay away from radical agendas or anti-India agendas, but focus on what ensures their employment, their growth and their future opportunities with an Indian support from Delhi.
Absolutely. Viewers, a fascinating discussion with Dr. Constantino Xavier. The point on the regional compass, if you look at the chessboard, is that this is a competitive region, South Asia, where there are a lot of powers that are vying for influence. India, of course, historically has been the main player, but now there are so many others, and it, in terms of the geopolitics, how we partner with many other countries in triangular formation in Nepal, in Bangladesh, this is going to make a huge difference, not only in terms of Indian influence or pushing back Chinese hegemony, but also in terms of the needs of people on the ground. The other big takeaway for me is, Dr. Xavier was talking about how we are able to reach out to the ordinary people in Nepal and Bangladesh and convince them about our goodwill and our genuine intentions to help them with their needs. And I think on that count, India has done well in the past, but we will need to reboot again because of these new regimes and new political winds that have come in both Kathmandu and in Dhaka. Let me thank Constantino Xavier for always keeping eyes on the ball on the region and enlightening us with his thinking and innovative ideas.
Thank you. Thank you.
So viewers, the sum of this discussion is that Nepal and Bangladesh are turning a new chapter, if not a new book, and it's up to India and how creatively we are able to adjust to these changes, adapt to them, and also assist these countries as they struggle with their own democratic processes and with their socio-economic churning that's going on in these countries. We have to closely associate with these countries. Indians have to study these countries better, and Indians have to travel there more, and we also need to be more humble and make sure that we are also learning from them, so that it doesn't look like it's big brother talking down to small countries. We are not big brother, and we believe that in the years to come, India-Nepal cooperation, India-Bangladesh cooperation will advance no matter who comes to power, because we've got this more wider and liberal approach to our dear neighbors. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.